So let me ask you this then, just before we move on, because I just kind of want to go back to the whole basic premise of this group. And we got together 5 years ago because we were facing the extraordinary historic effects of the pandemic. And the whole point of the next normal was that there was never going to be a new normal, which was an overused and misused phrase, because we have seen so many changes in the last 5 years. I just want to go around the table here and start with you, Ujwal, based on what you just said. Was COVID-19 the catalyst for what you just talked about? Did that light the fire in terms of saying, to hell with it, I'm not going to put up with status quo anymore. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to actually stand on my own hind legs and make something happen for the sake of my sense of purpose, my sense of meaning, my sense of whatever it might be. Foundationally, was that an accelerant?
I think it was, but I think it was because it forced a lot of people to try new things because they had no other choice. And I think that's where it gets interesting. For example, my wife is a therapist. For the longest time, she told me, I will never do therapy digitally. I have to see the client in person. COVID-19 happens, and now she has a burgeoning private practice run over Zoom. So I think part of it is, COVID definitely was one of those moments where it forced everybody to sit back and try something different. Sometimes, we're all afraid of change. Sometimes we need a negative event in our lives, something that forces us to do something. But that's not it, though, Dave, because the last few years, we're 4 years hence from COVID, and a lot has happened since then. But we're all sort of living in a lot of social and political unrest, not just globally, but locally. A lot of us living in countries that we sort of feel privileged to live in because there's a level of sense of security, level of stability. A lot of that is going out the window. So I think it's a lot of those factors. Culturally, there's just a lot of those factors where, I can definitely see the zeitgeist shifting, younger people saying, I'm tired of depending on other people, i.e. the government, elected officials to do stuff. I have to figure out how I can do things for myself so that, my life gives me a greater sense of fulfillment, meaning, joy, what have you.
But Dave, isn't that part of the reckoning that, we anticipated coming out of COVID? Whether you look at COVID being sort of that 1 year period or, quite frankly, we're still feeling the effects of it in many respects.
Yeah. I guess I wonder how strong COVID was in terms of changing the way we live our lives, our behaviors. I see that certainly community and family and the integration of community and family and work, I think has been kind of positive. I saw and continue to see my colleagues working from home and being with their children, which is a big change from pre-COVID, where you're off somewhere and your children were kind of taken care of somewhere. My concern is that we kind of forget easily, and we don't take advantage of opportunities that are made available. I did a bit of research and wrote part of an article on the fact that the heating and air conditioning industry actually has a device that you can put beside your home thermostat, and it tells you if you have a virus in your home. That's phenomenal technology, but why would nobody wants to implement it? Nobody wants to change the building code to make that happen. We have bird flu and other diseases, and we'll write that off until somehow it affects us in a major way again. I think, unfortunately, we tend to forget things sometimes quicker than we should.
Sarah?
Well, it's interesting because here we are and we're still talking about COVID. I think COVID has affected everybody's life in very profound ways. And I think the research has not all been done yet in how profoundly it's affected us. I think to, I think some people have really benefited from it, as Dave and Ujwal mentioned. I think it has made people more, some people more entrepreneurial, younger people particularly more interested in taking control of their lives and doing interesting things and doing things that are meaningful and doing things that are good for their families. I think that's been a real positive. But I think that one of the things that it's done on the negative is it has broken down some of the social norms, some of the social behaviors, the way people treat each other, the way people, I mean, God forbid, the way people drive these days. It's the norm now that people will drive through a red light. You can't assume when you're crossing a street that someone's not going to drive through a red light. And I think that normalizing bad or antisocial behaviors is something that has come and that really further separates us in communities and as societies. I mean, I think it's really sad that in a coffee shop or in a Starbucks, there's a sign that says, please treat our servers with respect. Yeah. Imagine having to do that. So I think there's been some really positive things from COVID, but I think we're still seeing the repercussions play out 5 years later.
Yeah, at least at the risk of cheering for COVID. I mean, and to Sarah's point, my big outing is to take the garbage to the curb these days. Otherwise, I'm sitting in a windowless studio for the most part. But on the positive side of that, and for those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, I'm wearing my Story Studio Network sweatshirt that the CEO decided I got as a bonus this year at Christmas. So it was quite fun. And you and I have talked about this before, Lisa, in the context of the future of work. Story Studio Network never would have happened without COVID. And I say that because who in their right bloody mind would have thought that we could have had two producers, one in Halifax, one in Toronto, produce studio quality audio and create content that was of that quality for brands, across North America. It never would have happened. We would have needed bricks and mortar. We would have needed high-tech facilities, etc., all at a high cost, and never would have done it remotely. This has really accelerated, in many respects, a lot of that technology and a lot of that opportunity.
Yeah, I want to wrap a few of the threads that have come out of the roundtable we just did on COVID all together. And, I'll start with you calling it an accelerant. I think it's an accelerant and a way that focus has been put on it. But I've also been digging into research over the last couple of weeks and months, and certainly over the winter break. You get an insight into what I find fun because I was reading through research as I was on a beach with my family. And what I really found fascinating is research from a number of different places, but especially from an American researcher named Jean Twenge, who used AI to crunch large data sets in ways that we never have been able to before. And so she's taken massive amounts of population-related data, everything from how people feel and happiness to actual demographic change to all kinds of different dimensions of the census from the 1800s forward. And what's fascinating about when we use technology in this way to make us better, to give us better analysis and better tools, is that a lot of the things that we are saying are the result of COVID actually started far before. So the rise in mental health issues and concerns for very specific and very general reasons, that is not something that started with COVID. The rise of individualism and a focus on, I'm going to look after myself and let go of some of the collectivist or more participatory activities that we do, that's tracked through the data to the introduction of television with the boomers. There is a thread between how technology has actually shaped our sense of society, collectivism. What do we owe to each other? What relationships are we in? How large are our circles? And how do we then look out for ourselves? That leads to some of the things that Ujwal was saying about the opportunity now that new generations have for these side hustles and in being able to be creative. And it's done in a way, it's not positive or negative, but the data is informative so that we don't just default to what seems surface, going back to the discussions that we were having about having hard conversations about hard things sometimes means we need to do some learning, and realizing it's not COVID that has put us onto this path. We were already on this path, and we can see it if we look back on these large data sets to be able to see what actually is influencing our society. And then we can start to take a look to say, okay, so if since the time that boomers were becoming teenagers, we started to see a rise in individualism and an impact that technology was having, how does then that inform our moral compass? And how do we start to address some of the issues that address the slide that we're on into significant individualistic approaches if we want, to Sarah's point, to be in a Canada that is defined more collectively? But the data, it's got to start with the data, and it's got to start with us really understanding what actually is happening. How does that play out in our workplaces? What's happening to our workforces? And then what do we want to do about it?